Live from UBC Studios in Kampala. This is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
It is just 7 minutes past 9 a.m. Thank you so much for being a part of UBC TV and welcome to Good Morning Uganda Extra with me, Sharon Chomjisha. A very cold morning, so if you're still at home, please make sure you carry an umbrella or a sweater or something that would keep you a bit warm. We don't know what the weather might look like. Uganda is a very beautiful country that in a few minutes, or actually a few hours, we might be able to have the sun rising. Thank you so much as well. We're coming to you live from the Nile Avenue, and yes, once again, a good morning. Now today, we've been graced by two people from the World Bank who are here to tell us a little bit more about so many things that are concerning the economy. But just a little background is that the World Bank is one of the most important development assistance agencies. It annually dispenses billions of dollars to third world governments, ostensibly to develop their economics through a variety of loan projects. Uganda is one of the beneficiaries that has all that money also, and it has gotten all the money dispatched to improve livelihoods, but has this money contributed to any significant economics in the country? Has the World Bank accelerated growth in incomes? Can actually its innovations or the help that they've sent in help the population in Uganda come out of poverty? This and more in our discussion today on Good Morning Uganda Extra. With me in studio is Miss Sashana White, a senior economist, World Bank, as well as Miss Rachel, or Mrs. Rachel Sebude. We'll get to know that, senior economist, World Bank. A very good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Sharon.
You are very welcome to Good Morning Uganda Extra on UBC TV.
Thank you very much.
Please introduce yourselves.
Hello, good morning everyone. Good morning to the UBC viewers. My name is Sashana White. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank, and here this morning to share what the work that the World Bank is doing, and also to talk about the latest Uganda economic update that we've done. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Good morning viewers and listeners. My name is Rachel Sebude. I'm a senior economist with the World Bank. I look forward to the discussion with you all in this extra program. Thank you.
We'll start with you, Ms. Rachel. What is the World Bank? I know there's World Bank Group and World Bank. So what's the difference?
Well, the World Bank is an international institution that was set up to support development way back in the 1940s, immediately after the Second World War. But it has developed to become 5 different institutions. We have the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. We have the International Development Association, AIDA. We have the International Finance Corporation, IFC. We have the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, and we also have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. Close home, we are actually associated with the World Bank. And the World Bank is made up of 2 institutions. AIDA, which is the International Development Association, which helps or works with government of developing countries to get them to the next level. Then the IBRD, which is the other part of the World Bank, just World Bank, is the one that works with middle-income countries and those that are more developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Ms. Sashana?
No, I think Rachel has covered what the World Bank does. So the World Bank has been working with developing countries across the world, and we have 2 goals: to end extreme poverty and to boost shared prosperity. So those are the goals that we're committed to, and so we work with the government of Uganda to ensure that those goals are met.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about World Bank that has given billions of money. Is that money free? How do we pay? Do we pay for that as a country?
Well, it is not, we shouldn't call it free, because we are supposed to pay it back as a country, especially at our level of development. When a country is still at a much lower level of development, high risk of debt distress, they normally get access to what we call grants, or a certain portion of their funding is actually in grants. But for Uganda, I think around 2006, it matured into, a mature country, so it stops getting access to pure grants. And now we offer what we call non-concessional borrowing. As of now,
what's non-concessional borrowing?
Non-concessional borrowing is where you get borrowing which is at very good terms compared to what you can get in the market. In the case of Uganda currently, we can access loans from the World Bank that you can pay 10 years after. In our terminology, that's what we call the grace period. You can get a loan today, use it to do whatever development or project you want, and then you can even use that project to start paying it back. And then you can pay it back over 50 years. So the terms have been even made much better. And then the service charges and all connected costs, interest rate is zero. So you can compare that to what you can get from the market. Can even just compare to a commercial bank in Uganda today. What is the lending rate today in the commercial bank, and what are the terms? You probably will find that you have to pay more or less like immediately after you access the loan. Whereas for the World Bank, you have that liberty. At the end of the day, we calculate the grant element within that because of those different terms to be about 73%. And what does that mean? That if I gave you $100 today, or 100 million, you actually get 73% of that as a grant. Uganda will just be paying back only 26% of that loan, or $26.
You're speaking about the market, and I'm thinking, but when it comes to nations borrowing or nations getting amounts from, isn't World Bank one of, are there other organizations that the country or developing countries can actually get money from? Yes, Ms. Sasha.
So if I could add, so there's the World Bank, there's also the International Monetary Fund that Uganda has been engaged with, so through their extended credit facility. So that's an organization as well that also provides funding to the government of Uganda for budget support. For the World Bank, we provide support through projects, but we've also done budget support in the past. And just to add that in addition to lending, the World Bank is also a knowledge institution. So we do studies that inform policies in Uganda. So we also do that, and we do technical assistance. So for example, the government could come to us. We facilitate training. So that's also some services that the World Bank offers in addition to lending to governments. Yeah.
What are some of you talked about studies. What are some of the studies you've done that are sort of looking at the policies in Uganda?
So recently, the World Bank did a country private sector diagnostic. So that's where we look at the private sector in Uganda, do an assessment of what the challenges or constraints in the country are, and then recommend policies as to how we think the government could, the policies that we think the government could implement in order to boost the private sector in the country. Most recently too, if we bring it back to trade, we've done a study on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So looking at the gains or benefits that Uganda has to get from joining that free trade area. And so those are just two of the most recent studies that we've done here in Uganda that really is set to inform policy and show the government how they can boost growth.
Okay. You talked about the private sector. What are the policies that you what are the policies that are governing the private sector that you have discovered in Uganda, and do you think anything has to be done to change so that Uganda is more accommodative or becomes, I think you talked about free trade as well, so that it's a part of the free trade community?
So one of the main things that came out of that study was that there's a lack of access to finance. And so if we can create the environment where exporters, but just businesses in general in Uganda are able to access credit, that they will be able to export more, so invest more in their production processes, export more, and then that will also boost economic growth. So that's one area. The study also finds that the sectors that are most that will generate most income and employment are agribusiness, energy, as well as housing. So those are some of the sectors that the report says, we should really push in terms of investment, and that will generate income and employment for Uganda and also reduce poverty in the country.
When you talk about finance, we have Uganda Development Bank, we have so many commercial banks as well that are lending money to people that want to start businesses, SMEs or middle, businesses that are established or people really want to start. What do you mean when you say that one of the issues you found is still attached to finance, yet we have all these companies or all these people that are sort of boosting and trying to help accelerate trade or business or entrepreneurship in the country?
So some of the issues, and I think Rachel might also want to add to this, is you have what's considered collateral, so what you need to provide in order to secure the loan, so that might be one issue. So if you're just starting off, you might not tend to have those to put up in order to borrow. The other issue is the cost of financing, so the interest rates that you're borrowing at, that you need to service the debt over time. So that might also be, that's also one of the issues that we find in terms of just accessing finance. And so you also, in terms of commercial banks, those some of the time are more for established businesses, but if you are just trying to start up a business, then it's more difficult to get a loan from a commercial bank. So that's where you need microfinance institutions to kind of lend to people that are just now starting out their businesses.
Ms. Rachel, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think let me start off with the cost. The cost of borrowing, if we took an example, maybe over the last 5 years, you'll find that maybe it was around 17%. If you look at the average, maybe some people can get it at a lower cost, but the average in the banking system could be as high as 17%. And inflation has been about 5%. That means a real rate of 12%. And you really wonder what kind of investment in the country can yield that return for you to be able to pay back comfortably. So the cost of finance is still a major issue. It arises from high operating costs for the different institutions, the commercial banks that are undertaking this kind of service, and also a lot of other issues like infrastructure costs and so on and so forth.
What do you mean infrastructure cost?
It turns down to transport, energy, because all those different kinds of infrastructure currently in Uganda, when you look at the cost, is still very high. And it's not only high for the common man, but also for all the businesses, including those that are offering finances for development.
Would that be because maybe we are sort of a capitalistic sort of country, that private sector really sort of rules and people have the ability to choose, or the market sort of is set because of the private all these people, companies?
Not really. I would say that maybe we need more competition in the market. The market is still small, but also there are just a few institutions. So there is a sufficient competition, but if we got more institutions involved, maybe we could see some of these rates starting to come down. The second issue relates to long-term capital. If you are doing business, the most important factor is that you can get capital and pay it over time. But most of the finance that is available is short-term, probably not more than 5 years. But any business requires much more time to establish and be able to move ahead. So the issue of long-term capital, I know the efforts that are ongoing in terms of getting UDB on its feet and making sure that we can we can increase the access to long-term finance, but that's an area that also needs to be worked on much more. And then Sashan, I think, also mentioned the access to smaller, enterprises, those that are just starting. In the study, we show that even for exports, you would think that maybe exporters are those people who are already a little bit more advanced compared to other SMEs, but they also go into exporting, and within a year or two, they are out of business. So Access to finance has been mentioned or found to be one of the biggest issues, because even running capital, you take your goods and they're not available. I mean, you are not paid immediately, because the entire world works on a credit system. You can put goods and then get maybe the finances later on. But if that framework is not available for SMEs, then it becomes very difficult.
So what has the World Bank done exactly for the SMEs? Because it looks like it's one of the parts that you're very passionate about helping.
So, so the World Bank has a project called the INVITE project, so Investment for Industrial Transformation and Employment, and that project it provides financing of $200 million US, and it's geared towards trying to provide micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises with access to financing in order to kind of boost their businesses.
Who is dispersing this money to the SMEs?
So the World Bank provides it through a government entity, and that's where it goes through. Yes. So we work as a bank, as the World Bank, we work with the government of Uganda.
Yes.
Yes.
And has this project just started, or it has been ongoing? For how long has the initiative been in place? Yes,
well, this particular project is in the process. We're expecting that sooner or later it will be approved so that it can start operation. Yeah, the INVITE. I can't remember.
The initiative, what is it called again?
Investment. Yes, for industrial transformation and employment.
Okay, okay. Now, are we really, I understand, a safe world will be one where hunger is no more, poverty is no more, mortality rate goes so low and all. But are we being very practical that actually we can wake up and we have alleviated poverty?
Well, that's what we work for. That's our dream and our vision and our mission, that we can actually eliminate extreme poverty and ensure shared prosperity. So all our interventions try to support government to, first of all, make the country grow faster, but also not to leave anyone behind, and to ensure that you also have interventions. Much as you're generating fast growth, that you also have interventions that can support those who are not actually part of the growth process.
There's also been an issue where many of the underdeveloped economies have a difficulty because of the immense debt burden from all the lending activities of World Bank. What do you have to say about that? I'll start with you, Ms. Sashana.
I think so. Debt is an issue in Africa that we've seen that even before COVID, debt was high across the continent, and with COVID and the fact that governments had to spend more to just for health to procure the health equipment that they needed, but also to kind of mitigate the impact of COVID on the most vulnerable in the society, we saw debt increase. But to answer your question, I think the World Bank provides one of the best terms in terms of lending to developing countries. So as Rachel said earlier, we provide the credit, which is the lending part, but we also have a grant element to the loans, especially that Uganda accesses. So I think while debt is a problem, I don't agree that the debt is because of the borrowing from the World Bank, because we have one of the best terms on the market.
Ms. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I think borrowing could be inevitable, but what kind of terms are you borrowing at? And once you borrow, are you actually using that money productively so that you can be able to pay back? For example, if you are building a road, are you actually going to have that road in place so that it can reduce the cost of transport and generate the growth and you pay back? So I think looking at what the government strategy of trying to use as much as possible, the non-concessional borrowing, if only it could put it in place, it could avoid a lot of the problems that many other countries are facing in terms of
non-concessional or concessional borrowing?
If it could use concessional borrowing, apologies for that, it could maximize concessional borrowing so that it can avoid, because the more you borrow on hard terms, hard terms, the more your risk of debt distress increases.
Ms. Rachel, are you Ugandan?
Yes, that's why I say we.
We.
Yes.
Okay, because according to the report, Uganda's public debt stock increased by 22%, 22% from 56.938 trillion in the financial year 2019-2020 to 513 trillion by end of the financial year 2020-2021. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, the increase, first of all, part of that increase was because of the additional high borrowing that had to be undertaken by government to support the COVID crisis management. I think the World Bank provided additional financing that it hadn't even, emergency financing, over 300 million. The International Monetary Fund were provided another 500 or so. And other entities provided funding around that time. And since then, there has been a number of other projects that have been approved to partially support that effort, to support a recovery out of the related to what the country went through on account of the COVID crisis. But that notwithstanding, I think the debt has also been growing faster in the previous pre-COVID years, about 2-3 years, because government had increased mainly non-concessional borrowing. I don't want to confuse those two words again. Non-concessional borrowing, and the biggest problem, much as the level itself, you know, when compared to other countries, is not as much scaring. It is around 49% of GDP, but the risk has moved to a moderate. It has always been low, but by 2021, it had moved to a moderate risk of debt distress. And what does that mean? That should there be any shock to the country, then the country could easily, you know, slip into debt distress. And what we, one of the other vulnerabilities is the fact that the servicing has increased. The level might not be very high, but the servicing of the debt, the amount of money you put aside to pay the interest, to pay the principal that is due every year, is taking a much higher percentage of the country's revenues. Today,
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is bad. That's why it's a vulnerability, and the more you increase it, that means you are taking our resources that could have paid for education, that could have paid for health, that could have built the roads instead of borrowing from the World Bank or from any other entity. So as those variables are evolving, that's where the worry about debt is coming from, and the fact that we actually need to be a little bit more careful on what terms we are borrowing for, on how we invest. Are we investing in the best opportunities that are available? And if we do invest, do we actually build those investments to the best of our knowledge?
I think to add a bit to what Rachel said as well, it's coming out of COVID now, the government has to now be committed to reducing expenditure. So expenditure increased significantly to mitigate the impact of COVID. So now it's kind of reversing that trend and ensuring that you reduce the spending. Also, domestic revenue mobilization is going to be very important, and the government has launched their domestic revenue mobilization strategy. So now going forward is really about implementing these things that the government has put forward that they're committed to. And that will help to reduce the fiscal deficit and therefore reduce the borrowing that the government needs to do.
When we also talk about how much does Uganda export?
So in FY22, the numbers that we saw was, I think, 4.5 billion US in terms of export. So that's currently what the export numbers are, and import is twice as much as what they're exporting currently.
So we bring in more than we actually take out.
Yes.
Is that a disadvantage, Ms. Rachel?
Well, yes, it is a disadvantage, and that's why it is critical to promote exports. The reason why, maybe let me just explain why it's a disadvantage, is because you are earning very little out of your exports and taking out twice as much. So it's draining the economy, and that's why the current account turns out to be high, and those are some of the issues that also drive external indebtedness, or the debts that the country owes because of those imbalances. Yeah, so it's important, and coming back to why the theme, coming back to the theme of this discussion of trade, it is important to see how countries can take advantage of all opportunities. For us at the World Bank, our aim is to see whatever opportunities there, work with countries and then develop it. For example, the African Free Trade Area, that's an arrangement that has been made by African countries. But why is the World Bank interested? The World Bank is interested in this arrangement because it knows countries can move out of poverty. The calculations that have been undertaken show that if we manage, if all countries actually ratified, the 44 countries that signed on to that agreement, if they all ratified and became members, we would see major improvements in income because exports will grow. Those who have been exporting or importing goods into Africa will actually start importing from fellow African countries. And we see some of the numbers indicated show that, for example, if we had tariffs liberated, if I may use that word, you could see a boost in income of about 0.2. If we talk about the non-tariff barriers that we all know about, border closures, stopping each other's trucks from moving across the borders and so on and so forth, we could raise trade by, incomes by 2.4%. And finally, if we increased trade facilitation, infrastructure is good. For example, you can move from Kampala to Goma, or from Kampala to Kigali, or from Nimuli to whatever, Khartoum, without major issues, and the trucks just go through, then you could also see a total increase of about 7%. So those are major improvements that can be attained by moving ahead with the measures that have been recommended through the trade area, so that we can trade more with each other, we can increase exports, and we can grow our economies.
If I could add to that as well. So full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area could, for example, exports is $4.4 billion now. We could see an additional $2.2 billion increase in exports for Uganda if they fully implement the African Continental Free Trade Agreement by 2035. So that's just some of the numbers that we're seeing. And if you also try to create the environment to facilitate increased foreign direct investment, that is an additional 1.7% increase in income gains, in addition to the 3.3% that Rachel mentioned for Uganda specifically. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is really something that would boost exports, but not just that, jobs as well, and reduce poverty ultimately for Ugandans.
Okay. We'll just take a short commercial break, and we're still talking about Ugandan regional trade as a driver of growth and economic transformation. Let's take a short break, and we'll be back still on the same conversation.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Did you know that at least 14 Ugandans die of malaria every day? Join Malaria-Free Uganda, Rotary Uganda, and Ministry of Health in the fight against malaria at the Rotary Family Carnival on Sunday, 18th December at Las Vegas Gardens, Bunga, with lots of fun-filled activities, music, live band by Areka Band, live performances from Vinca, B2C, and Azawi, kids games, the World Cup final screening, barbecue, and so much more. Entrance, 30,000 shillings for kids below 12 years and 60,000 shillings for adults. Brought to you by Rotary, Malaria-Free Uganda, NMS, and partners.
It's our mission to secure your money.
Protecting your money is as important as earning it. It is for this reason that the Deposit Protection Fund of Uganda, DPF, was established by the government of Uganda to provide deposit protection to customers of regulated financial institutions. In the unlikely event that your commercial bank, credit institution, or microfinance deposit-taking institution fails, the DPF will pay you up to 10 million Uganda shillings. Keep your personal information such as national identification number, mobile phone, or an alternative bank account updated with your banker. Terms and conditions apply. For more information, contact DPF at Aha Towers, Plot 7 Lodell Road, Kampala. Call 0312 206 400 or visit our website at www.dpf.or.ug.
We are the DPF. We protect your money. Protection Fund of Uganda.
Get yourself a Zuku TV decoder and satellite dish today at a low price of only 105,000 Ugandan shillings, and a Zuku decoder at only 60,000 Ugandan shillings, and enjoy your favorite movies, series, kids entertainment, music, local and international news, and lots more. Enjoy amazing packages like Zuku Smart Plus, Zuku Classic, Zuku Premium, and Zuku Asia. Get connected today. Zuku, life got better.
The Ministry of Health informs the public that there are confirmed cases of Ebola in Uganda. We, however, urge the public not to panic as the situation is being managed. The Ministry of Health further reminds the public to be on the lookout for any persons who may show signs and symptoms of Ebola. These include high body temperature, abdominal pains, diarrhea, vomiting, bleeding from the body openings such as the nose, eyes, and mouth. Please inform the nearest health worker immediately if you see anyone with these signs and symptoms. To prevent Ebola from spreading further, please take the following preventive measures: regular washing of hands with water and soap, avoid handshaking and hugging, avoiding any contact with any suspected Ebola patients. Any person who dies suddenly should not be buried but reported to the nearest health worker or LC1 immediately. For further information, please call the Ministry of Health toll-free number on 0800 100 066 or send a free SMS to your report on 8500. This message is from the Ministry of Health with support from UNICEF and World Health Organization.
The dialogue is aimed at ensuring that, one, we assess how far we have come ever since we developed the equity plan. How far have we gone in as far as addressing the equity, human rights, and the gender-related barriers to access to services? How far are we? The second thing we want to do, we want to secure government commitment, because without government commitment, whatever we do, we are doing it in the framework and with the support from government. This time around, we are not only emphasizing HIV, but we have brought on board malaria, we have brought on board tuberculosis. Our target as a country, as a nation, is to end the three diseases by 2030.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Welcome back from that short commercial break. You're still watching Good Morning Uganda Extra, and yes, we're talking about the World Bank and its role in helping developing countries like Uganda. My name is Sharon Chomdish, and yes, in studio with me is Miss Sashana White, a senior economist, World Bank, as well as Miss Rachel Sebude, senior economist, World Bank. Now we're talking about how Uganda exports less than it actually imports, and how that is actually a disadvantage. But why do you think we're exporting less than we are importing? I'll start with you, Mr. Sashana.
Thank you for that question. I think we first need to start with the structure of the Ugandan economy. So Uganda is a landlocked country. It also has a relatively small domestic market and a fast-growing population, of which is also young as well. So taking those things in mind, I think given the structure in terms of a landlocked country, Uganda really has to rely on its neighbors to transport. So there's time that it takes to transport goods. So for example, you import in Mombasa, to get to Kampala takes a while. The procedures as well that is involved in that process is also an impediment, so that could cause some impact on the number of exports that you do. There is also the issue of standards, so that is something that happens in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. So whether or not Ugandan exports are meeting those standards when you try to export to neighboring countries or even to Europe. We saw years ago that exports to Europe stopped because of that issue. There's also the problem of infrastructure. So in 2018, World Bank Logistic Performance Index, Uganda ranked, I think, 120 out of 160. And when you compare that to Rwanda, that ranked 57, and Kenya, that ranked 68, Uganda is not faring well. And the issues that were cited as the major issues are infrastructure as well as tracking and tracing. So those are just some of the issues that are plaguing Uganda and which are affecting exports. And so once those challenges or issues are addressed, then we expect that there would be a boost in export for Uganda.
I'm thinking we've been trading for quite some time, so why isn't there really, there might be growth and a difference, but then how do we sort of run instead of walking? You know, when it comes to, you talked about quality, you talked about standards, you talked about all these things. Miss Rachel.
Yeah, we've been walking, and maybe in some instances walking very fast, but in others, because there have been some breakthroughs for some exporters. I know some, exporters who are taking coffee to China. There are a number of, categories where we have made a breakthrough. But in general, for Uganda in general, I think there is a need to have a strategy on how do we step to the world stage. How do we push a big percentage of producers to be able to produce the quality, to be able to access those markets
and compete
because
internationally.
The markets are there.
Yes.
But how do we access them and actually stay there competing internationally and stay on the stage? I think one of the main avenues is integration, regional integration. I know Uganda has been part of the East African community, but stronger efforts are needed in that integration agenda to make sure that we can work on all these, different issues around trade. How come we don't have a common infrastructure yet that can connect us to make sure that trade can move quickly? And some of these issues can become easier if you work as a group, as a trading bloc, than if you work individually as countries. Then after accessing, making sure that we get all the benefits from the East African community, then we move on to the larger continent. As we say, the numbers are huge, the incomes are great, and if only we could turn around even 50% of what other countries have been importing from outside the continent, so that it's imported from within the continent, we would have done a great deal. And Uganda can be part of that game, can be part of that strategy. One way is, for example, most of the countries do commodities, agricultural commodities. But the issue of moving to the next level of processing, of adding value, so that when you do export, you're not exporting the same, commodities that are either out of the ground or you've just basically produced. And by pulling yourself out of the crowd, I think that's the words that we normally use, then Uganda can be able to export much more. We also talked about the cost, the time and cost, and that goes back to infrastructure issues. First of all, reducing time and cost of transport is not just putting in place the road. There are logistical issues that need to be addressed, so that if you actually have the road, you are not stopped at customs for 2 hours or 100 hours or 2 days for you to be able to cross your goods to get to the other side of the border. So there are a number of issues around logistics, especially logistics. We've been focusing a lot on infrastructure, but we also need to do a little bit more on the logistics so that we can reduce the time and cost of importing and exporting. Then the standards. Many of the exporters, I think we've had a number of, Sashana mentioned, a number of instances where our fish cannot
qualify.
Is banned from the markets in Europe. Our maize is banned by our own neighbor and brother, Kenya. But it's not because they don't like us. It is because of the quality. If they find that the maize, some of the bags have stones,
aflatoxins,
in addition to the more, aflatoxins that come because the maize wasn't stored properly, it started molding and all this kind of stuff. Then if we could address those issues, the issues of standards, then we can also be able to trade much more. Certification of products, and then lastly, we are an agricultural country. But agriculture has a very low productivity. We need to invest in agriculture because the basis of those exports, whether you've added value or whatever, at the end of the day they are coming up from what you can produce at the ground, at the lowest level of the value chain, and that is in agriculture. If you are going to take that path of transforming agriculture, agriculture has to produce at a much higher level of productivity with good inputs, good varieties through research, and then processing and all that stuff that makes a good product out of the farm. Yeah.
Okay.
If I could also add, there is a small-scale cross-border traders as well. That's something that would need to be addressed to regularize them, to ensure that they are now becoming a part of the official exports. I think the last estimate stated that about 50%, the quantity of small-scale cross-border traders can go up to as much as 50% of official trades. So I think if that is addressed, if somehow those persons are brought into the official export channel, then that would also boost exports. And most of those people who are small-scale cross-border traders are women, and this is their only source of livelihood. So I think not only will we boost exports, but we'll also provide jobs and livelihood for the females that are working in that sector that may be impacted by violence or anything like that that are preventing them from trading properly.
They've been also thought to be smugglers. That the small-scale traders that you're talking about has been, I mean, it looks like smuggling for some people. So what do you have to say about that?
I think maybe in some cases it can look like that, but I think that is why we need to make sure that we're formalizing it and bringing them into the fold of official exporters, so then that we're sure that they are really contributing and boosting Uganda's exports and therefore growth and output in general.
Okay, is that something that the World Bank has advised or recommended to Uganda?
So the World Bank has actually been involved in trying to make it to influence or change things. There's a regional project called the Great Lakes Project that the World Bank has funded, and this is to create on the borders, to create facilities to ensure that persons are able to trade safely, that they are brought into parts of the formal export sector. And so I think the World Bank has really put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, in terms of supporting small-scale cross-border traders.
What does AfCTA mean? I think CTA, Africa something. What is that about?
So that's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So Rachel mentioned it earlier a bit. So that's an agreement that was signed by 55 African countries, and so far 44 of them has ratified that agreement. And it's where they cover trade in goods. They also have investment, but trade in services as well, and recently digital trade. So it covers quite a large gambit of things that African countries use to boost their economy. And so basically it's to integrate the continent of Africa, to facilitate ease of movement between the countries, to facilitate ease of doing business. And I think there is great political will from the leaders of Africa to integrate. And so I think this is a way to boost income and reduce poverty across the continent.
Interesting. So I understand that you're also launching you are launching the 20th edition of the Uganda Economics Update, and that's on Thursday the 15th. What should we expect from this? I'll start with you, Ms. Rachel.
Okay. The Uganda Economic Update 20th edition, as mentioned, is a regular publication. We do this every 6 months, and the first part focuses on the current developments, the recent developments in the macro economy, and then undertakes an outlook to see how the country is going to fare, maybe in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years. So that's the first part. Then the second part interests itself in one of the crucial issues on development. This time round, we focused on regional trade. And by the way, this is not the first time we are focusing on regional trade, because I remember when we first did this economic update, the first issue was also on regional trade. It was trying to understand how Uganda can increase regional trade by understanding what it can trade, where it can look, is it looking south or west or east, where it can look and which kind of products it can export to those different areas, and then how it can do it, what kind of infrastructure and what kind of services can be done. So similarly, this time round, we are looking again at that issue, especially given that new opportunity of deepening and intensifying regional integration and through the FCTA, the African Continental Trade Area, Free Trade Area. And given that opportunity, because we know that Uganda can increase its exports to about by 2 billion. From the 4 to about by 2 billion, that means we'll be above 6 billion per year if we are part of this this agenda. Well, imports can also increase, but we know that our effort should be more focused on raising our exports. So I think this is this is going to be part of the discussion during that launch in terms of how it's going to. This is part of the trade week that we call the trade week, which is part of the launch of that economic update. On the actual day of the launch, which is on Thursday, the 20th, we are expecting to be at the Yuma Manufacturers Association showground in Lugogo, and we will launch the report, but also in the afternoon we'll have a high-level panel discussion that will be, we are happy that we'll have the Honorable Kadaga, who is the Minister of East African Affairs and very passionate about these issues. We'll have the UNDP lead, who has been leading on the agenda for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We'll have the Ministry of Trade on the table, the minister there. We'll have the Permanent Secretary of Finance to make sure that the finances are actually provided to enhance trade. Yeah, and then we also have our own country director who sits in Nairobi and oversees some of the countries that we are talking about that are part of the regional bloc, and who will also be part of the discussion. And then definitely our own country manager here who sits here. Yeah.
Thank you. We're out of time, but any last remarks? Yes, I'll go with you, Ms. Sashana.
Just to say that I think Uganda, there's really opportunity here in terms of trade integration. And so we invite the public to join us. You could follow us, our hashtag on Twitter, hashtag UGTrade. And so we are just inviting the public to participate in the dialogue and to tune in to what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has to offer for Uganda and to transform the economy.
Ms. Rachel? Last remarks?
Yeah, thank you very much for viewing, and we hope you continue following us through the week. But most importantly, to also work with government to make sure that we implement the issues related to addressing constraints to trade and regional integration, because it will see Uganda to the next level. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rachel Sebude and Ms. Sashana White, yes, from the World Bank. Thank you so much for being a part of the program. Make sure you can people come to Umasho Ground?
Unfortunately, because of these viruses, Ebola and COVID, and the regulations that are still standing, we've invited a few people, so it will be by invitation, but we are also open online. It will be live streamed, so people will be able to join in online.
Is that on TV or YouTube or something?
YouTube, on all the channels, YouTube, Twitter, and we'll have a Twitter space in the evening around the same issue. Okay. Hosted by Solomon Serwanja.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, you can join the discussion on Thursday the 15th to join the discussion about Uganda, regional trade, and for you to also see how much the World Bank is doing to try to alleviate poverty and to be on the agenda of 2040, Vision 2040. Yeah. My name is Sharon Chomjisha. Have a lovely morning and a blessed day. Bye-bye.